This is Made for More Living with Johnny Jennings, powered by eXp Realty. Online at madeformoreliving.com.
All right, Johnny, just piggybacking on that value increase, I want to share some information that I've shared with others. So read a lot of information on how much value solar might add to a property. Zillow states on their research, understanding that I'm speaking to a realtor, and most realtors I've spoken to don't put a lot of stock in what Zillow thinks.
Well, it's an algorithm.
Yeah, there you go. But they say 4% value increase, and I've always hated that number because I'll give you the context relative to our already existing conversation. If I take a $2 million house in SMUD territory that's got a $250 utility bill, solar added to that house is not going to increase its value 4%. Now, having said that, if I take a $500,000 manufactured home in Placer County that now has a $700 a month utility bill with PG&E, adding solar to that property might make more than a 4% difference in the value of that property.
Absolutely.
So I haven't loved Zillow's metric, but there was another study that was done that I think was better in relation to pure benefit, and it was a study commissioned by the Department of Energy. And effectively what the study came back and itemized or realized or concluded was that for every dollar that solar can mitigate in terms of somebody not having to pay that to the utility annually, it created about $20 in value in the mind of a purchaser or buyer of that property. So if I can eliminate, back to your point, if you can eliminate the utility bill, two houses exactly the same, one makes its own power, one doesn't, aren't you going to assign more value to the one that isn't exposed to PG&E versus the one that isn't, and then how much? So that study I felt was better.
I agree.
So everybody thinks solar adds value. Nobody can agree on how much, and I think it's that value dynamic because the value of a house is 100% dependent on the buyer, right?
Yeah.
It's a free market. So if you find a buyer that has lived in Texas where the energy cost is 13 cents a kilowatt hour, they may not assign as much value to buying a house in PG&E territory where right now in the summer, daytime, 43 cents a kilowatt hour, evening time, 62 cents a kilowatt hour.
Oh my gosh.
Right? So what are your thoughts on those two? Zillow versus the study on the $1 for every or $20 for every dollar you can save.
Zillow's classic Zillow. They just typed in an algorithm and just said that'll work. But that's not. It comes down to the budget. At the end of the day, what people are looking for is how is this impacting me personally. And that second study does that. I do have a question, though. So $1 saved, $20 in value. Is that saved? So if you save, say, $900, is that $1 saved over a period of like a year?
Yes.
Okay.
So think of it this way. Let's say solar saves somebody $3,000 a year. Okay. In theory, what they're saying is that would add $60,000 of value to the property based on their study.
Got it. Okay.
So the idea is that after somebody buys the house, if they can mitigate that utility bill, back to your affordability, right? Everything's about monthly payment and affordability.
Yep.
If I can mitigate the monthly cost of the energy substantially, everyone agrees that adds value. This study just came back with a specific number. And I'm not saying I agree with it because I think it's more fluid than that. I think it has to do with individual buyers and what their personal experience is and how much energy load and exposure they've had.
Yeah. If you're a single person living by yourself and you work and travel a lot for work, your energy usage is going to be lower than a family of 7, and dad works at home and they all watch TV and game and charge their EVs. You know?
Yeah. So there's a lot of people, the solar industry, even though it generates energy with sunlight, there's a lot of shady folk.
There you
solar,
go.
Right?
Dad joke.
Yeah, there you go. There's a lot of shady folk in solar. So I'm not one of these guys that says, hey, it's going to, add X, Y, Z. I mean, I always try to have this conversation with people that I think solar is valuable. But I think the other component to it, let's dig into this just for a moment. I think that there's a difference between the value of owned solar, it's on the house, it's paid for, it exists, it makes energy, versus leased solar.
Yeah.
I think there's a big difference between those two because, owned solar means I effectively don't have any payment for the system at all.
You just prepaid.
Yeah, so when I buy it, whatever it produces is helping me to mitigate my bill. I think owned solar probably has the edge over the other options in terms of, most value increase if you're going to look at the different methods that you could use to buy solar.
Yep.
Own versus leases versus, let's say, power purchase programs.
And it's the easiest to understand, honestly.
Yeah.
So most of the value gets muddied when somebody's like, okay, what is a PPA? Because all they're wanting to know is how much money am I going to save? That's all they want to know. If it's owned, that's easier for them to calculate in their heads. Like, is there going to be a true up?
Yeah.
There's just, so some people are like, yeah, my monthly bill's only $15, but then they have a big true up, and so it's just understanding at the end of the day, that buyer needs to know how much that solar is going to help them.
Yes.
And I agree with you. Owned is the best. It's cleanest.
I think what's going to have to happen is, I think over time, I think knowledgeable folks like yourself, realtors like yourself, I think if you have houses that have solar, I think the conversation with somebody that's an expert in the solar business is really going to help guide the advantage or disadvantage of the difference in the programs, right? So back to your point, owned solar is the easiest to understand. You mentioned a true-up bill. So true-up bills are an example of solar not making enough energy to meet that particular family's needs. Mm-hmm. So along with this discussion is that this idea that solar is not a one-size-fits-all solution for every house.
Yep.
Stated differently, I can take a house built by the same builder in the same neighborhood on the same side of the street with the same exact roof orientation, equal houses for all intensive purposes, put two different families in them, and one house could be using twice as much energy as the other house is using.
My house would be the one using twice as much.
My house would also be the one using twice as much energy as well.
I love it. I love the AC.
Yeah, I love the AC. I got an electric car. Those kind of things happen. But point being is that when somebody buys a new house, the biggest occurrence, so the lay person out there generally thinks if they get a negative balance true-up bill, if they end up owing the utility some big chunk of money at the end of the year because the solar didn't produce as much, they assign it as a solar problem, that the solar didn't do what it was supposed to do. And I like to tell people that's incorrect most of the time. I mean, it could be an issue, but I don't know what size shoe you wear, but let's say it's a size 11. You can't take your size 11 foot and put it into a size 7 shoe. Nor can I take somebody using 16,000 kilowatt hours of energy and make that fit into somebody else's bought solar system 5 years ago that only produces 10,000 kilowatt hours of energy, right? So the true up is an example of the system being undersized. Mm-hmm. It's not making enough energy. So that then speaks to, even though a house has solar, it doesn't mean it's going to meet the needs of the new existing buyer that's looking at it.
Would it be a good way to maybe just say, hey, this is the amount of production you can expect from the system. This is the average cost per month or average kilowatt.
Yes.
And then here's what the savings are going to be.
Yeah.
So then that way it's the same across the board.
Yeah. So the biggest challenge for an existing homeowner would be trying to properly communicate how much it might save a new buyer, because they bought a system 4 years ago, 5 years ago, might have completely mitigated their bill. They haven't experienced what we've been experiencing in the last 5 years as Californians in PG&E territory. And I talk to people every single day. I've got solar, so I haven't been experiencing it. But the idea is that the rates keep rising.
Yeah.
The last week, 4th rate increase for PG&E this year, just
Unreal.
approved by the CPUC, right? So the challenge is, if you bought solar before, go back 10 years, PG&E energy was only 25 cents a kilowatt hour. You've been living your life. Solar's been working. It's hard to explain to somebody that system is now mitigating what could be $700 a month had they not gotten it. Right?
Yeah, and so they're pissed because they have the true up.
Correct. So the easiest thing to do is to figure out how much the system is producing and then quantify that in current cost with the utility to create the contrast between how it's benefiting and I do that a lot with people that have a negative balance true up because they feel like solar was the problem. And I'll say to them, solar wasn't really the problem, and the system size is the problem. This system is mitigating this much of your current expense.
Love
Stated
that.
differently, it would have been your true up bill of $3,000, which is $250 a month, without the current system would have been $6,000.
Yeah. That saved you $4,000.
Yeah. So those kind of conversations I think are going to be meaningful in the conversation with a potential buyer, as the agent representing the buyer, or as an agent representing a seller, to understand the existing system on the house.
So for somebody who's listening, trying to figure out, okay, how can I figure that math out? How do they do it? Is it based off of when they go through their paperwork and they're looking at what the system's supposed to produce? How would they, back of a napkin do that math?
Yeah, and it would have to be that. It would have to be back of the napkin math. But effectively do this. Take whatever that system is producing, and because PG&E, we're sticking to PG&E because they're the biggest offender, right?
Yeah.
PG&E current rates, 43 to 62. Let's just use 50 cents.
Okay.
So figure out, because the idea is if you use more tier 2 energy because you get home from work, you're going to have a higher cost per kilowatt hour versus a retired couple that goes to bed at 9 o'clock that doesn't use a lot of energy in the evening time and not as exposed. So I think the 50 cents is probably a little bit of an overestimation erring against a homeowner, but I think it's going to be more accurate than any other method. But take the current generation of the system, multiply that times 50 cents, and that's the net effect of what they're not paying PG&E if that system's producing that.
So if it's what's a typical system on a home?
Size-wise? Well, the average homeowner uses about 11,600 kilowatt hours of energy a year. And the only specificity I can give to you of that is that's the total amount of consumed energy in California divided by the number of houses. I don't know what that means in terms of size of house, age, 3-bedroom, 2-bedroom. I don't know any of that. But 11.6, so let's just call it 12,000 kilowatt hours, average home in California.
And then what size systems do you see installed a lot?
Oh man, that's as varied as, how many different eyeglass prescriptions do you see as
different
an
cars
eyeglass
on the
doctor,
road,
right? Yeah. It's 100% dependent on energy usage. I mean, I get with some people, we get some people that call into our radio show. And by the way, if somebody wants more solar information, you can text solar to 84503. But when people text into our radio show, effectively what we see is I've seen people with 5,000 kilowatt hours of total usage, and I sit here and imagine, because I'm a high energy user just like you, I'm like, what kind of life are they living where you're only using 5,000 kilowatt hours of energy? Like you're very conscious about using power. And I've met some people that are using 35, 40,000. I mean, I think my highest residential consumption that I've worked out a solar system for was like 62,000 kilowatt hours, so almost 5 times what an average home would normally be in California.
Okay, so if they have like a 30,000 kilowatt system, then they'll just divide that by 50 cents.
So think of it this way: kW is the size of the system as watts. So K stands for 1,000 watts. So a 10 kW system is basically a 10,000 watt system. That 10,000 watt system will roughly produce 15,000 kilowatt hours. So there's a difference between kW and kWh.
Learn something.
So using a car analogy, think of kW as the horsepower of your car, the maximum power that it can generate. And then kWh is your annual mileage driven. So in energy, kW is the size of the system, panel count times the wattage. If I've got 20 panels that are each 400 watts apiece, that's an 8,000 watt system.
Okay.
20 times 400. So that's 8,000 watts. That 8,000 watt system will generally produce about 12,000 kilowatt hours.
Okay.
The relationship between kW and kWh ideally is 1 to 1.5 in terms of production. So what somebody listening right now would want to do is take whatever their production in kilowatt hours is, multiply that times that 50 cents.
Got it.
And
Okay.
they're gonna get real close to
what you're saving.
Yes, to what you're saving,
whether or not
what
you
that
have a
benefit.
true up or not. Like
Yes.
this is how much money you have put back in that solar system is working for you.
For an existing seller of an existing solar system, that would be a great thing to have in the write-up of the listing, especially in PG&E territory, right? You really want to sell the benefit. This helps us mitigate what would have been $800 a month, $1,200 a month, $1,500 a month in cost. If you can quantify the value for a buyer, then that's going to make them feel more comfortable, right?
And it feels real.
Yeah.
Like it's instead of like, what's a kilowatt hour? Like, what does this really mean? It's nebulous.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden it's like, wait a second. Hey, this, last year it saved them, $8,000 or $6,000
Yes.
in utility costs. Wow, that's $6,000. That's $500 a month. That's a car payment.
And I don't see that done. I don't ever see write-ups where in the listing someone's talking about the real world mitigation of the cost today. I think that's an anchor that should be implemented by more folks. But it's you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
Right. So
Okay, Matt, we all know the importance of finding someone you can trust. And then when you find that person, you want to use them over and over again, which is what happened with Betty. She had worked with Johnny Jennings and the Made for More team to sell her home previously. But when it came time to sell Betty's mom's home in Roseville so she could move her into a retirement home, of course, she called our friend Johnny Jennings at the Made for More team. They found her the perfect buyer for the home and negotiated a quick as-is sale so they could get their money as soon as possible to help mom get into her new retirement home smoothly.
Because you expect more, get more with Johnny Jennings and the Tom Daves team at Made for More Realty, brokered by EXP. Just Google Made for More Realty today and get more for your home. License number 581837.